Welcome to the All Hoops Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, joined by my co-host and star producer, Chris Brito. As you can see, we are here in person, our first live show together in a while. Chris, we get to talk a little finals. We get to talk a little breaking news with the NBA. But first, how are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. Happy to have you here in person once again. Someone's going to get married this weekend, and we're really excited about that.
Yes.
But onto the NBA, the Denver Nuggets just pulled off a dominant finals run. It never really seemed to me that the Miami Heat had a chance. And you successfully predicted this would happen. And I still kept believing that the Heat had another run, but it just wasn't enough. Really quick, because it's already been a few days, what are your main takeaways from that final series, the Nuggets, and do you expect them to be the favorites next year?
Yeah, great questions. I think, for one, this establishes Nikola Jokic as the greatest player in the NBA currently. Obviously, there's a big debate. He did not win the MVP. There's Giannis, there's him, there's Luka. It's Joker. It's clearly his league right now. This is the guy on the top of the mountain for the time being. Secondly, no one's really talking about this, but this is one of the more dominant finals runs we've ever seen. They only lost 4 playoff games during this run, 1 to Minnesota, 2 to Phoenix, 0 to the Lakers, and 1 to the Miami Heat. So not only were they winning, they won it all, they were dominant to do it.
Yeah, and just the way they did it, and I think this speaks volumes about Jokic. He just makes everyone better. He has an ability to make guys want to play and want to cut and want to get in their spots. And we saw the reemergence of not reemergence to say that his career was resurrected, but Aaron Gordon really played his role really well. And I thought Michael Porter Jr., who has been sort of pigeonholed as just an offensive threat, sort of did a lot of those things, even having poor offensive games in the finals. And Jamal Murray, I think, to me, is the other big story here. A guy who had 2 major injuries, or was it 1 major? I forget what it was, but he looked almost not obviously at the level as Jokic, but up there as the number 2, perfect number, perfect Robin to Batman. And I can't even be upset that the Nuggets won. I mean, I was rooting for the Heat to win, but the Nuggets were so great, and it was beautiful basketball, to be honest, as well.
Yeah, and the other question you brought up is, should they be the favorites next year? I think absolutely. This team actually has room to grow. You saw Michael Porter Jr., he did not have his shot in the finals, and they basically asked him, you're a jump shooting guy. That's where you make your bread and butter. It's not falling. What's happening? And he basically said, my shot's broken. I'll deal with it in the summer. And he will deal with it in the summer. He'll be back to being an elite shooter, to go with the rebounding he provided. Not a great defender, but not a terrible one right now. No. And that was a big issue for him before.
Right.
Obviously, Jamal Murray looked, as you said, like a elite number 2. Christian Brown's going to continue to get better. They got to figure out a way to bring back Bruce Brown.
Yeah.
But you still have KCP on this team. They have a lot of depth. They have other young players who can come in and take some minutes.
Yeah.
So I think as long as health is there, they're the favorites. I would put Phoenix number 2. But to me, I think there's a pretty big gap right now.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, I think we saw flashes from Christian Brown too, that I would not be surprised, and we were texting about this during the finals run, that it would not surprise me in the slightest that he would be a starter one day for that team.
For sure.
He has all the intangible skills, and he doesn't need the ball. That's the other thing. You sort of don't to me, it's the only 2 people that need the ball in that team are Jokic and Murray, and everyone else has to sort of figure out their pecking order. And just to see how this team came together, man, everybody was contributing. Even Porter, you were talking about, somehow he was able to carve a role for him in the finals too. So I'm really happy about that, to see where that team is going.
And there you have it. Next up, offseason, right? A lot of big storylines already coming out. Bradley Beal, we've been wondering for years, when is he going to get traded? Should he get traded? It looks like the writing's on the wall. Now they have a new president in place with Michael Winger, comes over from the Clippers. one of the first moves Michael Winger made with the Clippers, trading Blake Griffin's giant supermax. Here you have a supermax, just finished the first year.
Yeah.
What are you going to do there? It seems like the Beal camp is open to a trade at this point. They're talking about different scenarios. He is the only player in the NBA with a full no trade clause. So he gets to control where he goes. Obviously, there's a lot of interesting young teams like New Orleans and Sacramento that could be sniffing around, but he has control of where he's going to go. Where do you think that should be?
I think the perfect location for him is a place like Miami. I think Beal probably needs like a culture reset. I think there's been a lot of losing around. Like he cannot go to an organization and be the culture changer or like the guy who's going to be, he needs to be like the number 3 or number 2. So that means there needs to be an established pecking order. And I think Miami is a good fit because Butler is the number 1. Bam is the number 2. Between him and Beal could be 2, 3, whatever. But it's Jimmy Butler's team. Yeah. And so that's why I think somewhere like that works where he can just, be the secondary playmaker on that team and just be able to provide another punch because that team needed another punch in the finals. And between him and we're talking about as well, Dame, I think those 2 guys are the guys. Like if I'm a Miami Heat, if I'm Pat Riley, I want one of those 2 guys.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think the only way Beal is not part of the Miami Heat is if they decide we're going after Lillard, we're going to put the Beal talk on hold, and the Wizards decide we're going to try to get this done around the draft time, try to get a first-round pick in next week's draft. So I think a Tyler Hero and a first-round pick swap makes sense.
Yeah.
There's going to be talk about the Knicks. They're always star hunting. They will continue to star hunt long after we're gone, right? So does a Barrett in a first make sense? Is that too much to give up? I kind of think it's a little too much to give up because this is a player who is spectacular when healthy, but he's only played in, average 52 regular season games over the last 4 years. He is making supermax money. He's going to make $47 million next year, and that's the lowest he'll make in the next 4 seasons. It's a lot to ask for, plus giving up a first, giving up an RJ Barrett. I wonder, would they take a Toppin instead? They have Kuzma and Porzingis both as free agents. Do they plan on trying to sign one of them?
Yeah.
Do they decide we're going to bottom out completely and just try to be as awful as we can?
Yeah.
That could sway their decision about whether they want a guy like Obi Toppin. So it's very interesting stuff. I'm curious to see where this plays out, but I think this is finally the time where Brad's going to get traded.
Yeah, and hopefully he goes to a place where, like I said, like that just makes sense for his career trajectory and not go to a place like New Orleans or San Antonio or Sacramento could be interesting, but I feel like De'Aaron Fox is probably the number 1 there, but like you have a veteran like Beal that could sort of mess up the chemistry a little bit.
Fox, Beal, Sabonis could be fun. It does not solve the defensive issues though.
Right. So that's something to keep in mind, I think, for that team.
I think with Sacramento, they were on pace. I don't know if they finished it, but they were on pace to be the greatest offense ever and one of the worst defenses ever. And Beal would kind of sway that even further. I don't think they need another offensive star. Like Miami desperately does. The Knicks desperately do. There's plenty of teams that could use Beal's scoring punch.
Yeah.
I don't know if Sacramento is that team. I think what Washington needs back is they need a first-round pick and they need a young player. How good that young player is, how good that first-round pick is, how far away it is probably the thing they're going to be haggling over in the next few weeks. But the Beal contract is a lot. And I think their time to get a huge Donovan Mitchell kind of haul was 2 years ago. They missed their window. Now they have a new front office in place that are probably saying, it's time, let's blow this up. Yeah. We already got Beal's camp on the same page, so we know he'll at least listen to waiving the no trade clause. So it'll be interesting to see that play out. Obviously, we should expect another very, very busy offseason of trades, free agent signings, all sorts of things in the NBA. Chris, there's some talk about other superstars potentially on the move, not as obvious as Beal, but is there anybody else you want to talk about? A Dame, Zion, Trae Young?
Okay, so I think for me, I'd love to see Dame in Miami. It just seems like the most natural fit in the world. And like, I think if Dame is serious about wanting to make championship strides, I think that's the most logical place for him. And it seems like he also shares a similar like belief as well. In terms of Zion,
Yeah.
He's such a question mark because of his health, right? I think a place like Portland actually makes a lot of sense for him. You know, a place where he can like sort of like restart.
3-team deal, Dame to Miami, Zion to Portland, and New Orleans gets what, million draft picks? Because like you're not gonna swap Dame for Zion because then you have Dame and CJ again. And we saw that didn't work.
Yeah.
So
I think something like, oof, that's rough. I would probably trade that number 3 for Zion.
wonder who says no to that. Like if
I mean,
you're New Orleans and you
like-
covet Scoot Henderson, or you think Brandon Miller is the next great wing, you have to consider that.
and you restart,
And if you're
and you
Portland,
build around Ingram.
and if you're Portland
Mhm.
and you're saying we don't want to rebuild, we don't really want to deal with a 21-year-old Scoot Henderson, we want to build around Damian Lillard, wouldn't Zion be the best player you could get this offseason to pair with Dame? Like, I don't think it's going to work based on his health, but that's a very interesting idea, Chris. That's a very interesting idea. I did not think of that one. Number 3 overall pick for Dame. Which side needs to give up more? I don't know.
Mhm.
I would guess. I'm not for Dame, for Zion. Number 3 pick for Zion.
Yeah.
I don't know which side would say you need to throw in more. I think it also depends on how much they covet Scoot versus Brandon Miller, how the draft plays out. But that would be a very interesting way to have this play out. All right, Chris. We had some breaking news a little while ago. The Ja Morant suspension was announced. Obviously, Adam Silver came out after game 1 of the finals and said, we're not going to talk about this now, but it's going to be a huge suspension. We're putting the hammer down. It's 25 games. Do you think the hammer was put down? Do you think it's too harsh of a punishment? Do you think it's too light of a punishment?
I think it's too light of a punishment. Like, I think if you wanted to make a lesson out of him, I think it falls short. I think that it's not enough, but I think it just really depends on what happens from here on to like when he steps on the floor again. Like if he has another incident like this, like he needs to be like suspended for a whole season. Like I think right now there's sort of like not really putting a hard emphasis on like what he's done wrong. I think they're just sort of like slapping him on the wrist.
Yeah.
This is a little bigger slap of a wrist, but I think the NBA fell short.
I kind of agree. I get why you wouldn't do more. He's a face of a franchise. He's a guy who could be one of the faces of the NBA.
Mhm.
If you give him a full year suspension or something crazy like that, you know the Players Association is going to fight that, and you're going to have a mess on your hands.
And here's the other reason why I think that they fell short.
Okay.
So he already had his first suspension, right?
Yeah.
The league office found that Morant intentionally and prominently displayed a gun while in a car on May 13th. So what does that tell me? That tells me that you're not really afraid of the consequences. That tells me that like I'm trying to push you as far as I can go.
Yeah.
And so because of that reason, that's why I say that the league fell short. Like this is you trying to taunt me. And the NBA is like, oh, well, listen, 25 games is still 25 games, but I felt like you nip the bud completely. You don't like cut it halfway.
Right. I mean, when you think about it though, it's a little less than a third. It's a little less than a third of the season. So he's just starting his new max extension. I think that's around $35 to $37 million a year.
Yeah.
He's gonna lose $10 million. Because I mean, it's not a paid suspension, right? Like, it's without pay, I would assume.
Yeah.
So it is a pretty hefty punishment. It's just not what we were expecting when Silver comes out and goes, "We're dropping the hammer. There's a second offense. We feel like we found more evidence of other things."
Yeah.
So as you said, only time's really going to tell if this was something that's going to wake him up and get him to not do these things.
Yeah.
Or is this something where he's going to not think this is that serious. It's a slap on the wrist. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, he's a, what, 23, 24-year-old with all the money in the world. And if he loses $10 million off of this, it's not going to change his life. That's the crazy part. So hopefully he gets right, because he's one of the more fun players in the entire NBA. And whether he's been injured or suspended the last, year plus, we'll miss him. And we hope that he gets right and can take this Grizzly team far into the playoffs.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Hopefully. All right. We'll get to our final thoughts right after this. All right, Chris, final thoughts time here. We have the NBA draft next week. We just got breaking news that Michael Jordan is officially selling his stake in the Hornets. He's going to get around, $3 billion evaluation for the team. And I think you and I both kind of were a little sad to hear the news. Obviously, as the greatest player of all time, you don't really want to, as one of the greatest players of all time, you don't really want to hear him be one of the greatest terrible owners of all time. And the draft picks, the failed, bringing in players, it's just been a disaster for 15 years in Charlotte. And he's finally going to get a real player in here too with the number 2 pick.
You know what? The reason why I find it frustrating is because the league is filled with white owners, and I thought Michael Jordan, he was an incredible player, and but he was one of the first Black owners in the NBA, and I think that in a league where you have majority Black players, I thought it was, Michael Jordan was still that one person who, was with this majority white league ownership. And now to lose him, it kind of sucks. I mean, he wasn't a good owner. He wasn't. We were talking about this earlier when we were having breakfast. But how much of it is actually his fault? How much of it is bad luck? I think in many ways, it's what you do with whatever you have,
right,
and sort of make the most out of it. Look at the Miami Heat. They took they had 8 or 7 undrafted players in their finals run. That's making lemonade out of lemons, right?
Bam was drafting the teams. Hero was drafting the teams.
Jimmy,
they got Jimmy Butler for Josh Richardson in a first, I believe, was the deal. So it's crazy. It's
insane. So that's the reason why I sort of lamented the fact that he was selling the team and kind of gave. I didn't give up. It probably was maybe not a great investment for him, but I mean, he got $3 billion out of it. He sold. That was how much the majority stake was. But kind of sucks.
It does. It's disappointing, and I kind of think if they had slightly better lottery luck the last couple of years, this doesn't happen. I think he's there, and we don't really consider him a terrible owner. They had the worst record in the Anthony Davis draft. They finished 2 in that draft. They take not Anthony Davis, number 1. They get the number 2 pick. They take Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Yes, it was a terrible draft pick, but at the same time, they don't make that draft pick with a little better luck. Same thing this year. Whether Scoot or Brandon Miller becomes a star, we know Victor Wembanyama is a very different franchise-changing player.
Yeah.
Even if Michael Jordan decided, I'm selling no matter what, he gets more money. If they have Victor Wembanyama coming into town,
he probably gets another bill.
He might get at least $500 million more. Yeah. So it's crazy to think what if, but at the same time, the way these draft boards played out, they did not handle it well. They did not draft well. Really, LaMelo at 3 and Kemba at 9 are probably really the only ones you could say, wait a second, we did really well. Then you factor in the Miles Bridges thing, where he's kind of an okay role player up until year 4. 15th overall pick. He has a breakout year. Then it's time to pay him. And then the whole mess happens. What do you do there? I just think it was just too much for Michael. Between the poor drafting, bad luck, and then obviously the off the field things that are not in his control.
Yeah.
He might have just felt like it's time. I'm printing money with the shoe deals anyway. What do I really need to deal with this nonsense for?
Yeah, I think ultimately that's what it was, right? He doesn't need to be I think he already accomplished what he wanted, which is owning a team.
Yeah.
He probably didn't like it. And
right.
That's it. He really doesn't have anything to prove to anyone.
Right. You saw the stories of him going to practice for terrible Bobcat teams and trying to challenge them to 1-on-1s and 3-on-3s and all these crazy things. And he would always win. And so I'm sure not being able to inject talent into the group was probably the most frustrating thing for him in the world as the greatest basketball player, or one of the greatest basketball players. All right, last thing with Golden State, Mike Dunleavy Jr. is officially the new Warriors GM, taking over. He was already in the organization, so I guess their plan is to try to keep as much status quo as they can.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Dunleavy seems like a logical fit for a team that wants to like make another run with the guys they have. So I suppose good for them.
I wonder if it means keeping Draymond.
I would lean toward yes. And I think I don't know if you saw, but Draymond Green was also had Steve Kerr on his podcast the other day. They were like dissecting like the Nuggets Heat games, and like I was like, oh, that probably means he's gonna stay.
Could be.
Yeah. Really quickly, the NBA draft.
Yeah.
What do you think the top three will be?
Well, I think we know the top three. We just don't know the order. But I think
right. That's what I'm asking.
If I'm Charlotte, I gotta take Scoot Henderson. I think he's the best player. I'm so impressed with the workouts. I think if he develops a shot, he becomes a all NBA guard. And to me, if I'm Charlotte, that's not something I can let go out of the building.
Yeah.
Like Brandon Miller might be great. I saw a couple of goose eggs from him in the NCAA tournament. That doesn't mean he's not going to be a star too, but I would take more of the sure thing. And to me, the sure thing right now is Scoot.
I think that's like, especially if you're like in the top three, like you need to go for the sure thing.
And there's no crime at all in having your two best players be point guards. There isn't. And like neither one of them has really shown that they have the shooting yet. So if you have them, let's say Scoot becomes a star, you could trade LaMelo. Let's say LaMelo takes another step forward, you can play with both of them. There's so many things you could do. So I definitely think that's the way they should play it. And they really need to get this right. Like they have to get this right. This is too many drafts.
Yeah, I just don't think Charlotte will take a chance on Brandon Miller, especially with all the things going on in his circles, you know?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for the All Hoops podcast. Chris, I thank you. We got to do this in person. That was pretty good. We're going to be back next week to talk about the NBA draft. You know, obviously our Knicks don't have a pick, but who knows? Maybe they'll find a way to get back in there. But that's going to do it for us. Thank you for watching on YouTube and listening on Apple, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts.
Yeah, and also big shout out to this guy who's going to get married.
Can confirm.
Go, Steve. All right. Bye, everyone.